Y muy brevemente, pues
Very briefly, to know her better and to come closer to who Susan is. She is a person working on her dissertation about what distinguishes religious life of Ignatius and how it can be lived in the English church. She's a Lutheran pastor at the Swedish church, and she's also a consultant, and she is the person responsible for information and training. She works especially in Canterbury and Rochester parishes right now. She has experience as well as spiritual director and supervisor, trainer, and director for retreatants of different groups of people. With no further ado, we shall give you the floor. Thank you.
Getting hang of this, knowing what's said about me is quite important. All good, we hope. Yeah. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. And my subject is, as it says, giving the exercises to Protestants. Yeah. I will start with my own story, okay? And then I will look at some theological themes that occur when the exercises are given to Protestants. And then I will also look at the transformative aspects seen in practice when the exercises are given to Protestants. And then I will conclude, and hopefully within 30 minutes. So let's move to the first one then. So just a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Sweden, in the Lutheran Church of Sweden. And I came across Ignatian spirituality as a student, theological student in Lund, in the south of Sweden. Well, it was because I actually had a friend who went to the Gregorian University in Rome for a year out kind of thing. And she made the spiritual exercises with a Jesuit. And I was well impressed by all of this. And I thought, I really want to do that too. But in Lund at the time, it was not possible to make the spiritual exercises. So there was no way I was able to do it. I was then ordained priest, as we say, in the Lutheran Church of Sweden. But I very quickly moved to the UK, where I did my first few years as a priest, which is called a curacy, in the Anglican Church in a small village called Whitstable. Anyway, in this small village, they had a convent owned by the Sacred Heart Sisters. And as a new priest, I went to the convent, as you do. And they said, we give the exercises here. And I said, oh, could I do that? And the sister said to me, yes, but it's not for the faint-hearted. So I thought, oh, surprisingly, I said to myself, okay then, and made these exercises as the 19th annotation throughout a year and a bit. And this is back in the year 2000. And basically, it changed my life. So what did it do then to me? These are just a few things that I wanted to highlight. It gave me more than just faith, and I will talk more about that in a minute. It gave me a way of living, and it gave me experience of God, and tools to discern God's will. And one exercise that really I was gobsmacked by was the two standards. I thought, why has nobody told me about this before? I've been studying 5 years of theology and nobody has told me about this. I was overwhelmed and I thought, this is it, I've got to live for this. And it gave me a new direction in my life, which meant that I was trained to be a parish priest, but I changed my direction and actually moved to a Catholic convent owned by the Sisters of St. Andrew. Some of you might know them. It's an Ignatian community of sisters. And I lived with them for 12 years, and they have taught me everything, I must say. Anyway, the exercises also gave me a desire to find a deeper, meaning, but to help others with the same thing. And basically that's what I'm spending my life doing now. So what I do is basically give the exercises most of the time, it feels like, to different people in everyday life, in 30-day retreats, in 10-day retreats, and I'm trying to teach others to do the same. So it basically changed my life to live this. Yeah. I hope that gives you an idea where I'm coming from and why I'm here and why it's so important to me. So let's move on now and look at a more, look at this. So Protestants. Who are the Protestants? This is a question to ask, I would say, yeah? You talk about Protestants, I don't know who they are really. Anyway, the reason why it's difficult to know who they are is because within the Protestant faith, there are so many different approaches, okay? And that's why it's quite difficult to use the word Protestants, because you're not talking about one way of thinking, you're talking about a lot of different ways of thinking. So what is a Protestant? I mean, it's different churches with different structures, different theological approaches. You have, for example, the established churches like the Lutheran Church of Sweden and the Anglican Church of England, but you also got a lot of free churches like the Pentecostal Church, the Baptist Church. There's loads of them. And this makes it quite difficult to define what a Protestant is. And another word to use is Reformed churches, because they come out of the theology of the Reformers, like Luther and Calvin. But again, they were different too. So that's why it makes it quite difficult. Anyway, with this background, you get it. You get that it's difficult to define what a Protestant is, okay? I am going to try and use the word Protestant and look at reoccurring themes and signs of growth when the exercises are given to Protestants, okay? But keep that in mind, that it's difficult to do this. Okay. So we're going to start with looking at when the retreatants engage with the text of the spiritual exercises, theological themes. So these are the different areas I'm going to look at. So first of all, it's the first week. And these are like things that come up when Protestants engage with the text. So God's image in the human person and sin. And in the third week, the Passion, I will talk more about that. And then we have Our Lady, the Mother of God. And the last one, the understanding of church. Okay, so we'll start. So this is the first bit then, the first week. The classic theme, theological theme in the Protestant group, I would say, is justification by faith alone. You all know this. And a lot of developments have gone on during the years. But the problem is that this is still around in Protestants. Yeah. So faith is very focused on forgiveness of sins. And you need to believe to be forgiven. That's the bottom line. And you can't do anything. You just need to believe. Yeah. And it's shown in grace. You know, in the spiritual exercise, we use the word grace to cover gift. But if you say that to a Protestant, they would say forgiveness of sins. So the only gift you can have is the forgiveness of sins. Which means that you always have to explain to Protestants that this is not about forgiveness of sins. It's lots of different gifts. So the grace is much larger than just forgiveness of sins. And I think that says it all, yeah? Do you get it? It's very, faith is focused on being forgiven for sins. Right, so that's the first thing. The second thing that you encounter is the degree of disfigurement of God's image in the human person. God's image in the human person is very damaged in the Protestant tradition, which means that if you think about the image of God in the human person, as a pearl, it is actually cracked. Yeah. While in the Catholic tradition, I would say it's soiled. So it's cracked, which has an impact on how Protestants see themselves. And just to illustrate this, there's a picture. You can see the picture. This is a picture of the prodigal son. This was I was just giving a course before I came here, and this picture was the altarpiece of the church where I was. And as you can see, the prodigal son is very slimy, looking more like a sea monster than a human being. Yeah, and God is not pleased about this. He's looking quite discouraged by the whole situation. And I think this says something about how Lutherans see the image of God in themselves. It's quite slimy. Okay, that's the second thing. So the problem has been that many Protestants have then actually rejected all of this because they get fed up with it, basically. They think we are more than just slimy sea monsters. And also, faith must be more than just forgiveness of sins. It can't be so focused on this. Okay, so many people have rejected it, and this has an impact, which I will talk about in a minute, when you give spiritual exercises. So let's move to this one here. So the principle and foundation, now we're moving into what this can give to a Protestant. So the principle and foundation, as you all know, human beings are created to praise, reverence, and serve God, our Lord, and by means of doing this, to save their souls, okay? Now, this gives a huge new way of thinking for Protestants, I would say. First of all, human beings are created good. Wahoo, that's brilliant. That's a very good start, yeah? And they can actually choose to praise, reverence, and serve God. Really? Yeah. So these are quite uplifting things for Protestants, to kind of feel that, yes, I am created good and I can choose to live a life for God. The second bit they're not so keen on. And by means of doing this, save their souls. Do I have to do something to save my soul? So there you have this, saved by faith alone. Yeah. Most people, I would say, they're okay about it. They don't get like, but it's there. And you often hear, what is that second part of the sentence? Is that right? Yeah. So it's quite interesting, but it gives, as you can see, it gives a quite an uplifting theology for Protestants, I would say. So what happens is that the structure of the first week is very helpful for Protestants, I would say. First of all, they're loved and created and good in the first part. And then what happens after that is that when you start the first week, you find that social sin comes first. Protestants don't think about social sin very much. They only focused on the forgiveness of sins for the individual. So the whole process of the first week will give them a new and deeper understanding of sin, which actually is very uplifting. So they can see themselves as loved and forgiven sinners. So let's move on. That's the first thing. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the third week and the Passion as another theological theme. So as you can see here, there's a cross with a risen Christ inside it. This is very common in Sweden in the free churches. What happens is that usually in the Protestant churches, you would have an empty cross or a cross with the resurrected Christ. So the Protestants are very familiar with the first week, but not so familiar with the third week. Because they don't normally see the crucified Christ on a cross. They normally see the risen Christ on the cross. Because it's focused on forgiveness of sins rather than, and actually as well, the resurrection, you know, the conquering of sins and the conquering of evil. Those are the two things. We don't want to focus on the suffering. And actually, there are some problems with that, because suffering has not got a prevalent place in the Protestant theology, I would say. And sometimes you see that in extreme forms, like in prosperity theology. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a way of saying that it's only what is prosperous that comes from God, nothing else. And it really damages people. And it's around and living, I would say, in a big way. Now, the great thing about the spiritual exercises then is that it gives a different dimension to the passion and really, really deepens the idea of the cross for Protestants, and gives them what we were hearing about before, a new dimension of evil and suffering, which is hugely important for the continuation of the exercises, but also for them to be able to. And I had, just to give an example, I had a guy who's 27 and in a very kind of evangelical church. And I'm taking him, he's nearly finished now, but he's when he was praying the Passion, he was extremely, he was kind of, let's go into this now, you know, and really feel that I've been forgiven. So he was sitting by the cross, thinking that he would feel, you know, the forgiveness of sins and all the rest of it, which he should have thought about before, but because his head was so much into getting that from the cross, that's what he was thinking about. And then as he was sitting there, he suddenly thought, this is awful. And he started to cry and just felt, and he didn't know what to do with it. So when we talked about it, he realized that he was moving on to a completely different level of engaging with the cross, which he could then use in his everyday life. It doesn't always have to be happy. It doesn't always have to be prosperous. And it was beautiful to see how somebody like that, young age, can start to incorporate suffering in his life. Anyway, that's just an example of what can happen when Protestants from that kind of evangelical tradition come to the exercises. Right, the next one, which is a problem, is Our Lady. Okay, the Mother of God. This picture here is actually from a convent in Sweden, one of the few Lutheran convents. And it's the pregnant Mary, which you might be able to see there. So Mary's around in the Lutheran Church, but not a lot. So Protestants, on the whole, lack devotion to Our Lady. Do not pray to Mary. That's the way forward. Yeah. And they've been taught that from a young age. So it's just, it doesn't matter. You've been taught that. That's the way it is. So then you have a problem with the triple colloquy straight away. Yeah. Our Lady, the Son and the Father, how are we going to get around this? So common practice actually at the moment is, if people have a problem with it, we just say, just use the Holy Spirit. Because otherwise it's like this, yeah? So you've got to get around that. Having said that, this is not really a problem after a while. You know, when the triple colloquy comes the first time, it might be a slight problem. But then in the second week, when they've got to know Mary through the contemplation or the imaginative contemplation, it usually goes away and they start to really engage with Mary in a big way. And this is lovely to see. They get a new friend, a new devotion, or whatever you want to call it. And it can mean a huge amount. I had one retreatant just a few weeks ago. He was in the third week, and he had a great experience of Mary by the cross, where Mary said to him, I am the mother of all. And he was, well, how do I relate to this? And he came to me and he said, can she be my mother too? You know, and it was quite a big thing for a Protestant to say that and to engage with that. So things happen when we make the spiritual exercises. Okay. Now, the big one, okay? Understanding of church. So the rules of thinking with the church show the greatest divide, I would say, between Catholics and Protestants. And it's just that Protestants always protest, yeah? It's the way it is. And I mean, it's the word, isn't it, yeah? and don't like authority, okay? We don't like authority, and this is a problem. So what happens then is that if you read, most of the time you don't read, if you're a Protestant, you probably don't read the rules of thinking with the church, but if you do, you just ignore them. You just think, oh, they're not there, that's just old-fashioned stuff, we don't want that. And they just think of them as irrelevant, okay? And this can really upset some Catholics, especially trying to work with Protestants in minority places like Sweden, because Lutherans just don't see it. They just go, oh no, authority, we go away from that. And I would say that in different Lutheran or different Protestant churches, there are different levels of authority. So obviously in the Anglican Church where I work, we do have a bishop and we do have an archbishop, and there is the level of kind of hierarchy there. But the Chamonix community, they live with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I interviewed them for something else, and they said, well, Protestants just don't get authority, because they look at the Archbishop, oh, you know, but the rest of the Protestants, oh, it's just the Archbishop. And it's quite interesting, actually, how there is a difference when you think of authority, I would say, in the Protestant churches. Having said all of that, many Protestants would definitely see that church authority, church structure, the teaching of the Catholic Church, etc., and the understanding of the Pope, all of that is important too. But I think you have to be prepared for that if you guide Protestants. Right. Now, let's just look at the transformative aspects in practice. So first of all, I just want to highlight that the role of the spiritual director is extremely important. Obviously, for facilitating the process, holding the space to enable this transformative process to take place. But I would say as well that the spiritual director is really important as well it's really important for the spiritual directors to understand Protestant thinking and Catholic thinking, to be able to adapt in a good way, in an appropriate way. You need some knowledge of these things, because otherwise, you know, you can't adapt it, you know, in an appropriate way. And that will have an effect on how well it's received by the Protestants. Right, so I just want to highlight that first. So now let's move on to these different aspects then. A wider approach to life and theology, a closer relationship with Jesus, growth in freedom, and a desire to follow Christ in his mission of the world. So, first of all, a wider approach to life and theology, and this is what I've already said, really. The insights of the first week gives the Protestants a much healthier way of looking at themselves as created, loved, and forgiven. And I didn't say anything about Rembrandt's. You all know Rembrandt's Prodigal Son. It's quite different from the slimy one, isn't it, really? And that's become extremely important for Protestants, I would say, that picture. It's all over the place. And then the third week gives a deeper understanding of the passion and of suffering, as I've said before, which really opens up, I mean, both theologically and in life, to be able to sit with suffering is really quite a big thing. And then, of course, the triple colloquy and the devotion to Mary is not like that. It's all right to speak to Mary, which does change your devotion, I would say. Okay, so that's just the wider approach. And then this is really, really important, which I suppose is important for everybody. It's not just Protestants. A closer relationship with Jesus. So it gives new tools to deepen the relationship with Christ. And it's in the Bible. Now, this is really good news, because Protestants like the Bible. The problem is that for the last 60 or 70 years, Protestants have been scientifically studying the Bible. I mean, we have all been doing that, I think, but it's been kind of an obstacle to actually engaging with the Bible in the way that Ignatius suggests, which means that what happens is that the Protestants, they grab imaginative prayer and think, this is brilliant. We really want to do this. And sometimes you think, what? That's the only thing they take, imaginative prayer, because it's a way of engaging with scripture that they haven't experienced before. So a lot of people in Sweden, for example, the only thing they think about when they think about, Ignatian spirituality is imaginative prayer, because that's what they really want and that's what they're looking for. Anyway, having said that, imaginative contemplation, together with other exercises when Protestants actually make the exercises, give this affectionate, deep affectionate relationship with Jesus, and a deep commitment to him, which really helps Protestants to engage in a completely new way. And this, of course, this engagement, affectionate engagement, makes this transformative process possible. And it's the same for Protestants as it is for Catholics. I've guided many of the both, and there's no difference. Something happens which is deeper and very, very exciting, I would say. And we all know that this is all about growth in freedom. And we have that. The process of the spiritual exercises is about growth in freedom. We've heard that, and I think we all think like that. And it comes back to the first exercise. So the affectionate relationship in the second week gives this deeper relationship with Christ. And then that deepens, especially for Protestants, in the third week. As suffering becomes a part of living the Christian life or following Christ. And then in the third and the second week, that frees people up to choose and to follow Christ, because the focus of the affection is Christ. And that transforms people. And you can see that anywhere. You can see that in both Protestants and Catholics, I don't know, Orthodox, anybody really. It's that kind of deepening of that, which is what makes a difference. And, as we heard before as well, it evokes this desire to actually serve Christ in the world. And I would say many Protestants are keen to serve Christ, but it's usually coming out of doing it for God rather than with God. And in the exercises, you do it with God. You become collaborators with God rather than doing, oh, I have to for God. And I think that really is a twist that a Protestant will really feel as they make the exercises. Right, I'm running out of time. No, I'm not. It's 10 minutes past. So conclusions then. There are challenges, okay? And I've said some of them. It depends on what church you're in as well. If you give a Pentecostal this, there'll be slightly different challenges, but these are the general challenges that I have listed. Having said that there are challenges, they are transformative. And I think I've shown that as well. And then the spiritual director, his or her knowledge of Catholic and Lutheran or Protestant theology is really important to be able to adapt it appropriately to the situation and to the person sitting in front of you. And then finally, that growth of transformation of deepening that affectionate relationship with Christ, which leads to a greater freedom, can be clearly seen, I would say, in both Catholics and in Protestants. So that's it. Wow.